This is one in a series of lectures and discussions that we have had this academic year on the campus and off the campus in this instance. But we're delighted that you're here with us. And I'm so sorry that this is a really nice setting, but y'all are so far away from the panelists. And all of you on this side, my right-hand side, if you could move closer to the front so we could be more like a family. And panel members won't have to talk too loud. Of course, they have the microphone here. They'll use the microphone. But it would be good to be a bit more hospitable. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, there's really some value in being my age and having gray hair. People will absolutely do what you ask them to do. So thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it. My name is Lindsey and I am director of the Ham Institute at Jackson State University. And we are holding this special lecture and forum this evening in honor of an event that occurred 50 years ago. The campaign for Congress of Reverend Merrill Winston Lindsey and Reverend R.L.T. Smith Sr. That occurred in Mississippi, and we have an illustrious panel of young people and not so young people who are going to talk about the Lindsey Smith campaign and talk about today. And I greet you then on behalf of the Ham Institute at Jackson State University. We're also delighted that I know some professors brought their classes, and we have other people who are here, so we really thank all of you. But we are especially pleased that we have some representatives of the Lindsey family here and some members of the Smith family, I think, but I'm not sure. And we invited family members to come and be a part of this discussion. And I was a student at Russ College in 1962 when this campaign was launched here in this district and in the combined old 1st and 2nd district up in the Mississippi Delta. I was a student at Russ, and I worked on the Lindsey campaign as a student. In fact, it was my first real political campaign. I had been involved in campaigns before, you know, running for class president or running for the county line or something, but I hadn't been involved in a real campaign. And Reverend Lindsey was my religion instructor at Russ College. He taught me religion. And that's why I go to church on Wednesdays night, you know, with Reverend Lindsey taught me religion at Russ. And he was a poet. He was the chaplain at the college, but he was also pastor of the Asbury United Methodist Church in Holly Springs, Mississippi. The church where Russ College was founded in 1866, in the basement of that church. And Reverend Lindsey was the pastor of that church and the chaplain. And he was a poet. And I really learned a lot of poetry in that class about religion. So he taught poetry and religion. He was really a Renaissance man. And I met Reverend Smith by my involvement in the NAACP. In 1962, 50 years ago, we started the first chapter of the NAACP at Russ College, and I was elected president. So I met Reverend Smith through the NAACP, and of course, I met Aaron Henry, who was the brother-in-law of Reverend Lindsey. And of course, the rest is history. So we are just delighted that you're here for this special discussion this evening. And we're looking forward to just a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Because there are a whole lot of interconnections here. We have with us the daughter of Reverend Lindsey, Lindsey Hill is here. And Mashida was my classmate at Rush College. We graduated in 1964 together. Although Mashida started college at 15, and I started at 20. So there is, and that's the truth. If she was a 15-year-old freshman or a 16-year-old freshman, but I know I was a 20-year-old freshman. But Mashida is here, and Mashida loves to talk, and she is the daughter of a minister. And what I'm going to ask Mashida to do, and I haven't spoken with her about this, but I'm going to ask her to introduce her family members. So Mashida, if you would come up here, or use that, come up here so everybody can see your lovely face.
You got it.
Okay, right. Come on up here, dear. And introduce the family members. And let's give my classmate a round of applause.
Hello, everybody. Hello. That was too dead. I said, hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you. I am sure you're glad to be alive, right? Yes. Okay, so when someone says hello, we need to speak up and let them know that we are truly here. Now, for my family members, we have, most of the family members are Aaron Henry's grandchildren. The oldest one is Aaron. Will you stand, Aaron? He's named after his granddaddy. He's acting shy, you know better. And the baby grandson is Damon. And Damon recently got married. And so we have his wife. Will you stand too, please, baby? The other one, Lee Dorsey, is my cousin, our mothers and sisters. And it's interesting that we would be in Jackson every summer. You guys may take your seat. We would come to Jackson every summer and spend time on Lynch Street. And it's interesting because Highway 8 is split the property that we own. It split it right in half. And on one side was this big white house where my grandmother lived. And on the other side was another house where Lee lived. Lee Dorsey and her mother lived. But you know, when you say Jackson, a lot of things run through my mind. And when I see McLemore, he mentioned that he was gray. Well, let me tell you something. He was gray when he was in a freshman. But not as gray. We all knew that. So, like he said, I love to talk, so I'm going to be good and I'm going to sit down. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me later, feel free to do so. I'm just like my daddy. I hold no punches. And whatever you ask me, I am forced to tell the truth. Because I can't stand it if I lie. And what good would it do me to tell you a lie and you wouldn't know any better? But I would know I'm lying. My daddy always said, Mashida, you love to run your mouth. You have the gift of gab. One of the things that you should always do is speak up for the underdog if the underdog is correct. And I always try to do that. So, with that, McLemore, you got it.
Okay. That's my classmate, Mashida. We are, again, pleased with the panel members. And our moderator this evening is one of Jackson State's finest. Young, brilliant, energetic professor of history, has a doctorate from Howard University in African history, has worked at the Margaret Walker Alexander National Research Center on the campus at Jackson State, and is now teaching our young people and is very much involved on the campus and in the community. So we are just delighted to have Dr. Rico Chapman, who is our moderator. And let's give the young, brilliant, and absolutely exquisite young professor, Dr. Chapman, a hand. Let's give him a round of applause.
Dr. Michael Moore. I'll tell you later. This evening you'll be hearing from some scholars and activists about the height of the civil rights movement, but also you'll be hearing from a scholar about the now of the current, I guess we call it human rights movement, because we can't have any civil rights without human rights. But in the order that we'll proceed, we'll have Mr. Dave Dennis, the esteemed Dave Dennis. I don't know if you ever watched Eyes on the Prize. You'll see Mr. Dennis giving a fiery speech. And he was fired up. I wish I could remember the words, but he was beating on that podium. And I thought the podium was going to break down, but whatever happened that day, and I can't remember just exactly, but it really had Mr. Dennis fired up. He was a former freedom rider, field secretary for CORE, co-director of COCO. That's the building is right down the street. It's been renovated. He was a co-director of Freedom Summer in 1964. He's been arrested over 30 times. He's now the CEO and executive director and consultant for his firm, Positive Innovations Incorporated, and the Southern Initiative Algebra Project. So he'll be giving us some history at first. He'll be followed up by Dr. Morrison, who is currently a professor and head of the Department of Political Science and Public Administration and senior associate in African American Studies at Mississippi State University. He was previously the Frederick Middlebush Professor and Professor of Political Science at the University of Missouri, Columbia, from '89 to 2009. He served as Vice Provost from '89 to '97, and prior to Missouri, Dr. Morrison was at Syracuse, where he served as the chair of the Afro-American Studies Department for 5 years. So we'd like to welcome our two panelists. And lastly, Dr. Davis, a good friend of mine, she's an assistant professor of political science. Her areas of specialization include African American political attitudes and behavior, race and ethnicity, mass media and politics, and Chicago politics. Her teaching areas include American government and politics, research methods, African American politics, political dissent, and urban politics. And she is well published also. So give our panelists a round of applause. They have roughly 20 minutes each, roundabout, and we'll take questions and answers afterwards. We'll have first Mr. Dennis.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to be back in this space. First of all, I want to the Sheeta and Lindsey family. You have a lot to be proud of, and you already know that. When I came back to Mississippi in 1962, I was here just a few days, and I was arrested coming out of Dr. Henry's pharmacist at a drugstore because I stayed in too late. They had a curfew at 10 o'clock, if you recall, at that time is. And so I got out, came out of the building, got in the car at 10:01, and didn't make it. So I spent the night in the jails there is. Do we have family members from Smith family here? Anybody here? Great.
Oh, good.
What's your name? I'm sorry. You don't know, buddy?
Robert.
Right. How y'all doing?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to see y'all here. The rest of you, can you introduce yourselves, please?
Okay, again, I'm Robert Schuler Smith. These are my parents, Miss Alice Smith and Dr. Roy Smith.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to see these people here. One of my problems is today is that When I read books about what happened here in Mississippi and what it was like in Freedom Summer, I read about a few people. I don't read about the Lindseys. I don't read about Reverend R.L.T. Smith and others. And I don't read about a whole lot of heroes that I met when I first came here, who actually have paved the way for what happened in the 60s. They were here before SNCC, they were here before CORE, and they were here before the NAACP, although the NAACP was before any of us. And they're still here. I don't know if any of these people who played a leadership role then is some way of a card-carrying member of the NAACP. And I want to state the record straight is that we would not have been able to do any of the things that we did in the 60s if it had not been for people like Reverend Smith, Reverend Lindsey, Amzie Moore, just Aaron Henry, and you could C.C. Bryan, you could name them across, Mrs. Palmer, you hear about Mrs. Hamer and them, but there were more than that, there was also. But they were all there who paved the way, who hid us, who fed us, who housed us. And they stayed there after some of us left. And we talk about the 1,000 kids who came down in 1964. Well, we don't hear about the people who stood up in the rural areas and said, you may stay in my house, and I will feed you. And who walked down with them down the streets and protected them. And when those kids left, they had to stay and face the man every day. We don't hear about them. We've got to figure out a way to bring them to the front, and we'll tell you why. Let's get back to the politics too. Then, I wonder every day if the children today who are relatives of the people who participated and who are just as much of a hero as anybody else, if they knew that their family played such an important role, how would they feel about themselves now? How many of them would be standing up in leadership that carry on the flag and say that this is for my people, this is for what my parents did in the movement, and my parents were part of this, and I was proud of this. If they only knew what a difference it could make today, maybe we wouldn't be able to go into the different areas that at one time. See, when Reverend Lindsey, Reverend R.L.T. Smith, and other blacks at that time ran for office, number one is, they took their lives in their own hands when they did that. You could get killed then just by saying, I would like to register to vote. You could get killed then by saying this, I want to read about the right to vote. You could be killed and lynched by saying, I want to pick up a book and learn about the Constitution, which I have to interpret when I go down and try to register to vote. So that was a different time then. But there were some good times then. Because at that particular time, we did have our own communities. We did have what Reverend R.L.T. Smith and others represented. We had an economic base. Well, it was not that big. But you could go to that grocery store down there, you know, and you could get what you wanted. If you didn't have it, if you could trust you. Pay me tomorrow. They were businessmen. They were community leaders in a different way. And we had our communities at that time, which is a togetherness. So when a man stood up to say he was going to run for office, he was not just running because of some name. He had a cause. He ran for a reason, to speak for his people. Because he came from a community whereby when people passed by, the elders would be there. And it was, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. And you respected that lady and you respected the kids because the children of the communities at that time were the children of the community, not just of their parents. I came from a single parent home. But I had a whole bunch of daddies. And I had a whole bunch of mamas. And they would see me coming down the street there and they'd say, hey, Sonny, how you doing? You doing all right, Sonny? Yes, ma'am. Doing fine, Miss ma'am. When I did something wrong, hey, boy, come here. And they had the right to chastise me whenever I did anything wrong. And I had better say yes, ma'am, and thank you, ma'am, for it, because I was one of their children. Then when I got home, I got it again. And my mama would thank them for taking care of her biological child. So we came out of a different time. And something happened. The fall of the movement. And people like Reverend R.L.T. Smith, teachers, the businessmen, the doctors and the lawyers, lived next door to the carpenters and the janitors, and the housekeepers and the cooks. And they knew, and we knew each other. We knew when Reverend R.L.T. Smith drove down the street. We knew his car. We could wave at him. Lindsey and others, and politicians, what we call them, and there was a difference than what we have today. And not jumping too far ahead is, but unless we change, because they talk about it takes a village to raise a child. We don't have a village anymore. Unless we begin to take it back. We've seen the homes and things that places I used to walk down here when I came to Mississippi, or when I was from Shreveport, Louisiana, or wherever, thriving neighborhoods. And something came down, and I feel a part of that, because we missed the boat in civil rights movement. So we talked about integration without really knowing what it really meant. We crossed the track and we integrated, but this country did not integrate with us. So the stores, the grocery stores, like those owned by Reverend R.L.T. Smith, and the drugstores that were owned by like Dr. Aaron Henry, and all of those places were just wiped out because the fact is we decided to go down to the other stores and buy stuff and we didn't support our own businesses in our communities. When people say we didn't have anything, telling us a lie. We had bed and breakfast places. How could we move from place to place if we didn't have a place to stay because the doors were open? I remember when I was a kid, we didn't go to fancy restaurants. But there were neighbors across the areas who opened up their living rooms on a Sunday and put a table out and you come out and you pay them a little bit to eat. Anybody y'all remember this? You go and you sit down there and you dress up, and you coat and tie, and you come to church and you sit there and you had a meal just like anybody in any big restaurant you go to now. There was a neighborhood. So when we ran for office in those days and made political stands, it was about a cause, a movement. It was about representation of our people coming out of where we were and lived together in a community. We don't have that now. And very briefly, which takes us into the politics of the day. It was intentionally done to us. In 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer at the Democratic Convention stood up and made a famous speech and said, "I'll be sick and tired of being sick and tired," and she challenged this country And the President of the United States immediately called for a press conference to get her off the air. And that was when they said, we got to get this thing going faster and stop this movement. Because we had a movement. They had to get off the air. But they didn't stop there. They had to satisfy the world and the country about the fact is that this country is not so bad. We are a democratic country. There was just a few people down in Mississippi who said you can't register to vote, but we can sit that straight now. And there's a few people down there saying you can't sit down and have dinner. The rest of the country said, so we're going to pass some bills. So came the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that we all coming up to pretty soon as be the 50th anniversary of that. I call it the Trojan horse of the civil rights movement. It was the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And give you a bit to think about that. The act itself was pretty good. It gave us the right, which we already had, to go to these places and sit, eat, sleep. But at the same time, what it did was attach some things to it, called poverty program, urban renewal. There you go. And so what happened is, the first thing they did is, the strength of us in the movement was about family, extended family, what I talked about earlier. When I walked down the street and where I was raised, I had many mothers and I had many fathers. Then came a person by the name of Monahan. He said about the fact is that you came from a single parent, you're doomed to failure. And the problems in the black community is the fact is that they don't have mothers and fathers to live together in their house. Well, let me tell you something. When they brought us over here as slaves, the first thing they did was to break that up there. So what made us so strong? Because they took it away and we were able to survive without it. To walk down the streets and do something wrong, we could put 1,000 people in the streets. So that was our strength. So you had to stop that. So the brainwashing piece is to cause us to begin to hate and dislike ourselves and to blame ourselves. And if that wasn't enough to take away, they took away our culture and stuff, is because they moved us, everything was across the track we had to go. Put us out of our businesses, say go to a hotel down here is, forget about the bed and breakfasts. And then when bed and breakfast, people try to get together, and people in the stores, and others say we got to have larger stores and compete with the Winn-Dixies. And the others out there who was in the corner of the town is, they wouldn't loan us the money. So slowly they began to destroy our communities. And begin to talk about, you don't have to say yes ma'am and no ma'am. You're supposed to say yes and no. That's the way to do that. And we got TV, we got the rest of the stuff. And we destroyed it. That wasn't enough. When I hear you talk about Highway 80, it's not just Highway 80. There's the I-26 and the I-56s and the I-36s and all the rest of them that came through our communities and went straight through our communities. In many places, right where you had black businesses growing. Durham, North Carolina, used to have a group of area there. It was called Little Black Wall Street because that's where your insurance companies and others, our black insurance companies had their offices and stuff. Urban renewal came through with the expressway right down the middle of it, all kinds of promises. Destroyed the business. And if you go from one city to the next, New Orleans, Claiborne Avenue, you can name them, Atlanta, Avenue. And they broke up our community. It was all intentional, and we got okeyed by the Trojan horse of the civil rights movement. That was their intention was to kill it. And that moves us into today's politics and where we are today in this country. When I look back at these people, Reverend R.L.T. Smith, Reverend Lindsey, Amsey, and I can just name them all, Mr. Divine, C.O. Chen. I mean, how do you think we got out of jail? It's the black landowners who had land, who went down and engraved it all and signed those pieces of papers to get us out. See, Phil Chin, who walked down Canton, the streets of Canton, with a gun on his side and said to Billy Noble, "I dare you." Those are the people who we don't hear about, don't read about. And they're part of our history. And whenever we get this opportunity, and when I think about back, let's see, when you're right, you always had great hair. But what they're doing here is, and what the Civil Rights Movement, the Federal Hame Institute, is bringing this back together, is whereby we can be able to see who the other people were, the real backbone, the people who put the floor beneath us. It was a different time than what we have here today. Politics for black people in the 60s was about movement. It was about people and the rights of people. It's about principles. And that was the other thing they did too they tried to make us believe that any black businessman was an Uncle Tom. They tried to make us believe that any black business, because in order for him to deal with downtown and about to meet people, that means he's an Uncle Tom. They were smart, they were brilliant. They knew how to wheel and deal with the man. I would always love your parents and forefathers. They paved the way for all of us. And I think anybody here from SNCC and CORE and SCLC, that is NAACP, whatever civil rights organization, the real honor, praise that should go to these people who paved the way. We don't know them. But if you know them in your family, bring forth those names, bring forth those addresses and say, I read those stories. Call Leslie, that's what they're doing. And tell them and holler to them, this is what my family did to us. This is what they participated in, this is what they led us in, and this is what their contribution was. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm delighted to be in the house with the Hamer Institute. I am about 2 hours away, and I look jealously less on the activities you are organizing here. And I was saying to Dr. Chapman that I wish I could get to more of these. 2 hours turns out to be further than one thinks it is. But I am delighted to be here and to be in the presence of these families. I wish I could make you understand what it was like for me as a small boy in Edwards, Mississippi, growing up to see the courage of your parents and your grandfathers. These were those who gave me the courage to go on to do what I do. And I think Mr. Dennis has really established the context, which was the first part of this that I wanted to talk about in sort of situating these two men, and that is to establish what this environment was like, what it meant for somebody to step out and say they were going to run for office. And the context, really, was that we lived in a police state, an authoritarian state of the worst kind that would give the Soviet Union, which we all hated in those days, what was happening here would give the Soviet Union pause. Because a good deal of the effort to sustain the segregationist system in Mississippi was state-sponsored. It wasn't as if these were some rabble-rousers somewhere all by themselves who decided they were going to beat up somebody on a given day, or going to burn somebody's house down, or to bomb somebody's house. These were all state-sponsored activities. And that's a context that we shouldn't forget. That these policies, these efforts were emanating from the governor's office, who was egging people on. And what that meant, finally, that broke open the system and makes these two men so important, was that the furtive NAACP movement finally came above ground. And I think it's important for us to establish the importance of the NAACP, an organization that everybody today wants to bash, but it was the important organization at this moment in Mississippi that broke all of this open. And we should not forget that. These men were important leaders in this effort that had first been underground and eventually comes above ground. You would be wise, those of you who are the young people in the audience, and I'm delighted to see so many young students here, or maybe my eyes are just so old that I can't see that there are older people in the audience, but you would be wise to go back and read some of the material of what was happening in the Regional Council of Negro Leadership. Meetings that were being organized that I, as a small boy in Edwards, had no idea this was going on. There were mass meetings going on in Delta communities and down on the Gulf Coast. Hundreds of young people who were raising important questions about the status of their existence of citizens in this state and in this country. So this authoritarian state was met, finally, by a movement of African Americans that was on the front page, so to speak. And it doesn't mean that resistance hadn't been going on all along. We all know that. There was always resistance ever since we were enslaved and brought here. There was resistance, but finally now, people were stepping out on the precipice, and one of the opportunities that gave them the courage to continue was the fact that there was a movement going on elsewhere in this country. Other people were raising the same kinds of issues. Other leaders were stepping out in other places. There was another civil rights movement going on, and there was a kind of contagiousness about what was happening. And there were connections between our leaders here in Mississippi and those in other places. So eventually we get a movement. I want to talk just a minute about the biography of these two men that makes them special. I call them visionary social change agents, and I'm not going to bore you with lots of minutiae. When one thinks biography, you think I'm going to be up here all night reading pages and so on. But there are a few things about their biography that are general, that I think are important in establishing who they were and why they're so important. The first thing is that they were courageous men, as Mr. Dennis has suggested. It took great courage to stand up before this man who had his foot on your neck all these years, and he just didn't have his foot there, but he had a gun too. There's a great deal of violence that the state-sponsored terror was sustained by. So they were, first of all, that's the first part of their biography, is that they were courageous men. Second, they were men whose leadership qualities would be recognizable if they walked into this room this evening. We all know strong leaders when we see them. We can't quite define what this thing is that constitutes leadership, but we know it when we see it. They were examples of it, having all of these qualities. And you know, less using the word Renaissance men to refer to them, I think is apt. They did all kinds of things, or the embodiment of all kinds of things, if they were to walk in here this evening. Third, they were both clergymen. And clergymen have been very important leaders in our community from the days of enslavement here. And so they represented that element of something important in our community that made them leaders. They were businessmen, landowners. They had all the qualities that important white men and women have. The only difference is that they were black, and there were barriers to what they could do with their business acumen. I have been going through some of the papers of Reverend Smith in the archives downtown, and it will amaze you at the sheer creativity he had, buying land, building this, building that, for his community. Apartments that people could live in when they couldn't live regularly in any place in town they wanted to live. That was very important stuff. But for being black, they'd have been the carriers of business acumen that would have rivaled that of any of the plantation owners and thieves and robber barons in the white community. They were also a part of an educated elite, and I don't mean this in a bad way. They were people who had acquired sufficient learning and gave it back to their communities. They didn't put it on a pedestal somewhere, as they might have done. They could have done that. Reverend Lindsey, giving to his students in Ross College, he was not just an ordinary clergyman, but he was a theologian, a person who thought about the heavy-duty ideas of what it meant to be a student of religion. They were all experienced in black-based political organizations. NAACP was just one of them. But if you read the notes, as I have, of the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, all of these names are there. Yes. All these names are there that Dennis called here. Operating in this organization that was organizing those meetings in Delta communities where hundreds of people showed up. It was a carnival-like atmosphere, except for the powerful ideas they were talking about. So they were, from the very beginning, on the ground floor in the organizations that mattered in our community, that were thinking about and talking about social change. So from that point of view, they were social change visionaries. How is it they became the prime suspects at that moment in 1962? What is it that made them the prime suspects for stepping out and run for office? Well, I've already told you a part of this story. It was something that was happening in the NAACP. There were two men who were important here. Medgar Evers, whose life, as you know, was aborted, and Aaron Henry. These individuals represented an important shift in what was happening in the NAACP that made a safe ground for SNCC and CORE and all the others to come into the state and to be nurtured by them. Aaron Henry was a nurturer of all these organizations and made a safe place for them. And if you talk to individuals from all these other organizations who come in, they cite Amzie Moore and Aaron Henry as people who had integrity, people that they could depend on, and so on. Aaron Henry had an important movement, and I've written about this story, the Clarksdale social movement that was going on right about at this moment, where he was challenging public facilities with his community. They were going into bus stations trying to, quote, integrate them. They were going into hotels. They were going to theaters, the library, and so on. But there was another element of this that was very important and that we often miss. There was a social class element to this movement. A part of what happened in the Clarksdale movement was a boycott of the business community in Clarksdale, where Aaron Henry and his community argued that those of you who own these businesses, those of you to whom we go to buy our groceries and so on, who are cheating us at the cash register and so on, I'm putting you on notice that there is a lower class element, as it were, he didn't mean it in a bad way, that's coming after you in the place where it matters, in your pocketbooks. And so this movement in combination with this notion that Henry had, and he had this from the very beginning, that yes, he wanted to integrate bus stations and train stations, but he always had the vision of black people voting for black things for their black selves. This was Aaron Henry, who had a race-centric notion about the acquisition of power. And so he suggested that is it not time for us to contest these congressional positions, even though we don't have a franchise yet. But it is important to make that move to demonstrate the importance of the vote if we did have it. And so the outcome of the election was foretold. But the last thing I want to acquaint you with was the platform for this election, and there was one. These were not two men who just decided, you know, we're black, we are important leaders, we're going to go out and test and contest these congressional positions because the white people who are in those offices don't represent us. They had a platform that was absolutely clear about what it is they wanted, what the grassroots community they represented had told them were important things that they should go after. And so I just want to go through briefly what the platform looked like, the pieces in it. The first thing was something periodic. This is a period piece. The first thing in their platform was an endorsement of the National Democratic Party administration. Now, what that was about was the fact that they existed in this authoritarian state where the political party, the Democratic Party, was lily white and blacks could not participate in it. And that party was flaunting its objection to the National Party by the day. They were even deciding and publicly saying this, that they weren't going to vote for the standard bearer of the Democratic Party. They were going to vote for the Republican or some third-party segregationist candidate. So it was an important point for these candidates to make. No, we support the National Democratic Party. Finally, we started identifying with that party. Kennedy was in office, and they were very hopeful about what this represented. Even though that was flawed, and I think they understood that, but it was an important point for them to make, that we're dissociating ourselves from these racists in the Democratic Party in the state of Mississippi. The second point in their platform was support for foreign policy that was friendly to other nations. Remember what this moment is. It's 1962. All of Africa is decolonizing. And all of a sudden now, the African states are becoming independent and joining the United Nations, are bidding for membership in the United Nations. And a part of what this foreign policy issue was about was a nod to the fact that this was happening. The other part of it was they did not want to be associated with the isolationist perspective of the United States government in reference to foreign policy. Then they got down to the real nitty-gritty stuff, where they were talking about welfare issues in the state of Mississippi, Delta job creation. We all understood what that was. Control of flooding along the Mississippi River. That's perfectly clear about the Mississippi Delta. An agriculture stabilization program. They are worried about what has happened to this labor force. We are an agricultural labor force if we haven't migrated to the north already, and they're worried about what's happening to this labor force in the Delta. Then they get down to the real nitty-gritty, the elimination of the racial system, they called it. They wanted equal protection under the law. They wanted the right to vote. They wanted justice in the courts. They wanted the elimination of police brutality, intimidation, and harassment. Sounds like a refrain from this morning, right? They wanted education without discrimination and segregation. They wanted the use of public facilities for all people. And finally, they wanted activities to be measured by a Christian ethic. This was an important element in our community, and it's not surprising that they arrived there in the end. Well, I've probably used up my time. The last thing I want to say a word about is what this wrought. Obviously, they didn't win. We know that they didn't win the offices that they stood for. But they opened up what was going to be a means that completely breaks open this political system in the state of Mississippi. Eventually, the white party structure is destroyed. And we move into another moment, and I've got ideas about that that I'll be happy to talk about some of the question and answer period. Thank you very
much. Good evening, everyone. Okay, anything to say now? Good night. I guess I wanted to start out first by looking, I just had two things. I teach at Jackson State, and I teach a very large American government section. It's about 70 students on average. And sometimes young people, I went to a talk on Tuesday night, and sometimes the older generation, if you will, comes down to the new generation and says, you're not doing anything. And what happened to the movement and to the inspiration and the motivation. And so one thing I like to tell my students, I like to point to Mississippi and talk about two things that happened from Mississippi. When I moved here, people asked me, you know, you're not from here, of course, right? And why are you here? And I said, well, I came here for a job. And I got this response, to Mississippi? And I'm like, yeah, you know, well, why did you move to Jackson? How do you like it? And so I was surprised by the fact that people were surprised that I would come to Mississippi and to Jackson and actually like it. And so one of the things that I think people should know about Mississippi, and those of you who have lived through it know, but the younger generation may not know, that Mississippi has a distinction of having the highest number of black elected officials in the United States. Most of the case law that constitutes the Civil Rights Voting Act, the case law came from cases in Mississippi. So people who came before us who fought for civil rights, we have the case law that gives us the right to vote and various civil rights that we have, it's because of people in Mississippi. So why not come to Mississippi, right? So I like to talk about that. Also, we're talking about today the future, the past, the future of blacks in politics. So my question is, what's going on currently with blacks in American politics, in American government? So I just want to talk about a few things that influence the effect or ineffectiveness of blacks in politics today. So I'm a political scientist, so bear with me. It's going to be political sciencey a little bit.
That's all right.
So the one thing I want to talk about that I think is going to impact the future of black politics, the 2010 census indicates changing demographics in the United States. So changing racial demographics, changing geographies of where people live, and changing numbers of economic. First of all, the changing demographics for African Americans are blacks have been shown in the last 10 years to be moving back to the South. So we know about the Great Migration, right? And several waves of Great Migration. Talented came first in the 1890s, and then the various waves through up until about the 50s, late 50s. But blacks are moving back home. They're moving back to Sun Belt cities. Mississippi, Jackson is one of those places, but they're coming back to the South. However, they're not coming back to places like Jackson, Mississippi. They're moving to the metropolitan areas. So they're moving to Brandon, Pearl, Flowood, Ridgeland, right? They're not coming into Jackson. This is a demographic shift that is going on nationwide, where blacks are moving back to the South. So one thing that's going to change, perhaps, is the Republican bloc electorally in the South, right? Secondly, the changing demographics too. I heard a very surprising statistic, so I looked it up myself. 2010 census shows that children who are now under the age of 5, so these kids under the age of 5, white children are in the minority. That black children make up the majority, not black children, minority children, make up the majority of children under 5. So when these kids are 18, they will be in the majority when they are 18 years old of the younger generation. So we have 18-year-old voters. Think about when they turn 18 and they become voters, they will be in the majority. So we can't be totally locked out from stuff anymore. Also, changing demographics too. Large urban center cities like Chicago and New York and St. Louis have lost population. That's where those black folks came from when they moved to the Sun Belt cities. So Chicago used to be number 2 in black population. It was New York and then it was Chicago. Chicago is no longer number 2. New York had 2.1 million black people in the 2000 census. Chicago had 1.2 million. And does anybody know what the highest state is now? Or city for black population? Atlanta, Georgia. Okay? Number 2 in the nation for black population. All right, second factor that I think affects, we talk about changing demographics, it's not demographics, but political attitudes. The Pew Research Trust did a study in 2010 on black political attitudes, intra-racial and attitudes about the United States. And 2 questions caught my attention. The first question was, can blacks still be thought of as one race? Young people under the age of 30, guess what they said? No. No. People over 30, yes. The second question was, Do the black poor and the black middle class have values in common? People over 30 said, of course they do. People under 30, no. So what this shows is a growing class divide within our own community. Not only class economics, but a growing divide in values. This may divide the black vote. It can have an impact on how we think about ourselves as a group of individuals, whether we consider ourselves a mass, whether we have linked fate, which linked fate is what happens to me as a black person, has some effect on what happens to you as a black person. There's a weakening of that. Part of the reason is not just because, well, I believe that people just think, I don't want to be black or I'm not like the people, but if I look at the demographics of where the people are saying no. The Northeast region, so along the Atlantic coast, New York and Philadelphia and DC, a lot of the people, young people who live there were the ones who said no, and also on the opposite coast, the West Coast, okay? So on the Northeast, I lived there for a year, so I understand why they said we can't be thinking of as one group anymore. It's because there's so much increasing diversity within what we call black. Okay? So we can't say, hey, let's all get together under the black tent and powwow and kumbaya together and we're gonna go out and march and vote because what you may think is an important value, I may not think is an important value because there may be intra-racial cultural differences that exist. So what you value, you think is important, I may not. So that's one thing. On the West Coast, and that's where I'm from Seattle, Washington, I also understand why they said no. Because there's a lot of integration there. A lot. Much more, and it's not that there isn't still this structural barriers, there isn't still racism, that racism exists, but it's the idea of I live around a diverse group of people, I interact with them every day, I work with them, I go to school with them, I may date them, they may actually be my friends. So this whole idea of this monolithic blackness doesn't apply to me. I may also be biracial or multiracial. I may be black and Asian, black and Filipino. I may be an African ethnicity and black American. So this changes what we think of as black people as a group. It may affect how we vote in the future. Another factor that has an impact on black politics currently and in the future is the growing conservatism in the United States. Economic conservatism, social conservatism, and political conservatism. I'm talking about the ideological conservatism. So, for example, people who talk about abolition of the 14th Amendment, states' rights. Whenever I hear the term states' rights, I think right back to 1959, right? Because that's what segregationists was all on, states' rights. We have the right to decide who we want to shop in our stores and sit in our classrooms and at our lunch counters, and it ain't you. You're trying to change my favorite quote, our way of life. Your way of life is dependent on my people suffering. I'm sorry, that's going to have to change. Period. So when you talk about states' rights, I think about you're trying to change our way of life kind of talking, right? That's racism. I'm sorry, it just is. Because you cannot predicate your success on the backs of people's unsuccess, okay, or their suffering. That's not right. Any way you look at it, it just isn't. It's not right. Also, we have an increasing, growing polarization in the United States between Democrats and Republicans. Some will say, no, we don't. We have a run to the middle where you can't distinguish between the two groups. They all look alike. They're all politicians. I'm kind of getting to be in that camp, maybe because I'm getting old. I've been around for a little while now. 10 minutes. But, there's an increasing gap between conservatives and liberals. And also in the United States, I find it astounding that being a liberal is a bad thing in a liberal democracy. How absurd is that? We have a liberal democracy, but it's a dirty word to be called a liberal. I don't get that. So, the growing divide between liberals and conservatives, we are increasingly finding it hard to find common ground on issues that really matter to everybody. And so people are getting very stuck. We have ideologues that are developing, and nobody wants to give ground. And that's on both sides. That's on the liberal side and on the conservative side. So that's another problem. A larger issue that goes on intraracially is the lack of a pipeline and mentorship for future political leaders. There are some PACs that exist, some groups that exist. One is called Emily's List, and Emily stands for early money. It's like yeast, it makes the dough rise. And what that is, it's a group for women who, Democratic women who want to run for office. There's been a recognition that there are not as many women in office because no one is recruiting women for office, no one is training women for office, and no one is funding women to run for office. So Emily's List got started to do exactly that, to fund women. Why don't we have that in our community? Why don't we have political mentors who are mentoring the future generation of political leaders? There is no pipeline. And instead, what happens often, I'm just going to say, I got to be honest, I'm like the woman, what's the woman's name?
Machida Lindsey, my
Yeah,
classmate.
Machida. Yeah, we here.
Yeah.
I tell the truth. One of the reasons is because there are people who don't want to move off the stage when their time is up.
Say that again.
Okay? We got to get the Sandman out with the hook to get them off the stage. And because they don't want to move off, they're not reaching back to bring up the next generation because they're only concerned with their own and where they are. But when you go, when you die at your desk, what are we going to do to fill that seat? There's nobody there. And some of you may have seen me on TV saying the Democrats need to man up. I stand by that. Because if we're going to support Democrats and they're going to run for office, and if we're going to ever take back the House in Mississippi, we have to have political leaders, but we need training. We need a pipeline that's going to train people and encourage them and fund them to run for office. Local office, state office, and national office. In America, you can't run for dog catcher without a couple of greenbacks. Hey, you know how much it costs to run for president now? Anybody here from my American politics class? $500 million. But we don't have money for education. $500 million. We have people who have spent $90 million of their own money to run for a Senate seat. $90 million to run for a seat that's going to pay you $175,000 a year. What does that mean? It's not about the money, is it? It's about the power. Okay? And the only way we can compete with that is if we run our own candidates. And if we train them. And if we fund them. We can't get very far without the dough. We gotta have it. And that's just real. And we can do it. We've done much more with a lot less. We have, as Black people. We built institutions in churches and communities with washerwomen's money, sharecroppers' money. We've done it. And we can do it again. And that's my other thing. A positive thing is we have money now, right? We ain't rich, you know. I'm not paying half my income for my mortgage or rent today. Got a couple of dollars to rub together. Or Gary said a couple of nickels. I said a couple of dollars now. You know, we do have the money. So it's not like, you know, we like to shop and get our hair did, you know, and go to the club and to the comedy show, but we don't want to give $2 to fund somebody's campaign. And it's for our future. Because those clothes is not for your future. You know, 2 years, you're like, oh, this old stuff. You might spend $20, $50 on it. You could have given it to Johnny to run for office. Okay? Also, and so that gets back to what we were talking about the village. So the village not only helped raise our children, now the village to stand up and help raise our future political leaders. That's what the village needs to be about now. Because that's one of the ways we're going to be able to get our way out of where we find ourselves. Other positive factors. So I think that, you know, those are the things. Oh, and one more thing. Another issue I think that we have is this nationwide conservative political agenda that is going on, that is using the Southern strategy nationwide. Okay? It's no mistake that New Yorkers come out, poor kids, Black kids need to go push mops and act as janitors in their public schools. It's not a coincidence. Okay? It's not a coincidence that the man that shops at Tiffany's is going to talk about what poor people should be doing. I want to know, how does he even know? When's the last time he's seen somebody that was actually poor? And I was seeing Dr. Deardorff today, and I don't mean lower middle class. That's probably what he considers poor. I'm talking about poor. You can't afford the other O and R. Okay? I'm talking about poor like that. When's the last time? So using this national conservative agenda, we're starting to hear so many things, and I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned. And if we don't have pushback, I mean, let's be honest, black people frequently, we have been the soul of this nation. We have made the nation stand up and face its hypocrisy. And if we're out shopping and watching the game all the time, we can't make them face anything. We're not standing up and saying, well, hold up. What are you talking about? You're crazy. I wish I could have been in the audience when Newt Gingrich made those comments. I'm sorry. I was thinking, I've been arrested and thrown out of there, but I don't care. Somebody needs to tell him to shut up. What are you talking about? You ever seen a food stamp or a SNAP card? You know what the word SNAP means? Don't mean this, brother. Okay, so the reality is that we have politicians who are running a national agenda for a political party. They're signing pledges, not to us, the voters, the American people, the citizens who the system was designed for, of the people, by the people, and for the people was what Lincoln said. They're signing for their political party, what they're vowing to do for their political party. That's not for the American people, okay? They're signing pledges that we will not raise taxes. We almost didn't get our little payroll tax break. I'm gonna have to get my 2%. It's a few dollars. More dollars, I'm giving dollars to the Johnson to run for office. You know, they didn't want to raise taxes until it came to working people's money. It was no, we're not even going to close loopholes that give corporations freedom to not pay their fair share. But when the payroll tax expiration came up, they were hemming and hawing about, well, America can't afford this right now. We can't afford that 2% break. Well, hold up. You were supposed to be no tax increases at all, ever. But for working people, they can afford it. No, we can't. They, in America, in Congress, can't afford it. That's whose salary needs to be cut. Not mine. Theirs. So, I don't understand about this national agenda, the Southern strategy. So if you start listening for those code words that politicians are using and to talk about what they want to do for America, listen closely. Because it's not really for the America that a lot of people actually live in. It's for their small vision of America. It's not the one that you and I live in every single day. I don't know what America they live in. It must be on some planet. They leave work and they get into a spaceship and they zoom off to that spot and then they come back to work the next day. Because they're not living on the same planet that we're all living in. Our reality is much different than their reality. And they don't seem to get it. There's such a great disconnect between what's going on politically and what's actually really going on in people's communities and homes. That is a great challenge to what we want to do for our society and for our community. It presents a great challenge to be able to combat this nationwide strategy to really go back to the past. Really, I sit and wonder often, what does all this really mean? Where are they trying to take us? Where do they want to go? And I'm confused. And I studied this. Okay? That's real. I've been thinking about it and asking questions, right, Michelle? Every day. What do you think this really means? Been asking these questions. We need to ask these types of questions. I don't know if I'll ever find an answer, I don't know, but it's a challenge. So I didn't want to be Debbie Downer. Don't talk about the negative things. I want to talk about a few positive things too. I think that one positive factor which we all can acknowledge is President Obama being the first black president, actually getting elected in the United States. That shows our kids and other kids it's possible. Okay? You may not have another, it might be the one and only. He'll be blasted up all over forever and ever. He may be the one and only. I hope he's not. But it sets the example that it is possible. I think a lot of people really thought it would never happen in my lifetime, right? Never. They couldn't even fathom that it would happen. And I know the reason why is not because they didn't think black folks would vote for him, because because they think white folks will vote for them. But white folks did. And that's another positive. All white people were not racist. Okay? During the civil rights movement, there were some good white people, that's why good white folk, good white people who worked in the movement. They risked their lives, they risked their families, they risked their jobs, they risked their body to fight for rights for black people because they acknowledged that what was going on was not right. So it's not just all us. Us, you know, we're Americans. We have to acknowledge that. And Americans come in all colors, all shapes, and all sizes. And that's what they saw. So that's one of the positives, too. I also think that social networking, although it is a distraction, I think, in some senses for this generation, I don't see anybody here on their phones right now. Put that phone away, Michelle. The social networking as shown by what went on in the Middle East with all the marches and the revolutions for democracy, all started by social networking because these people live in repressive societies in which government control communication. And in some countries, they even shut down the internet. So people use their phones and they text and they got messages out the best they could. But they organized revolutions in country after country using social networking. We can do that too, and we should, because our television, the misinformation that comes across the TV, on the news, from night to night sometimes is astounding as well. Things that get covered and don't get covered. So we have to be our own citizen journalists and spread the word. You know, we need to reestablish the grapevine. Anybody here old enough about the grapevine? Right? What's out there? Talking and spread the news. So we need to do that again, but now we have the electronic version. So the new age grapevine is Facebook, Twitter, and we can use it. And we can spread the word and we can organize. Okay, so I think that's good too. I think also we have numbers, especially if we join with other oppressed groups. So, you know, it's not just us who gets the back end of policies and legislation in the United States. It's not just black people. It's other minority groups too. It's women. Often we don't think of women as minorities, but we are. It's also Latinos, Mexicans, it's other poor people. So if we join with other oppressed groups and other, we would be in the majority. We would be in the majority, not in the minority. Okay, so black people, it's not enough of us to stand in our own corner and say, no, we are the most oppressed and nobody else suffers from slavery but us, and that's why we're just going to do this on our own. We didn't do it on our own in the civil rights movement. How are we going to do it on our own now? We need to join together with other oppressed groups because we all have common things that we need from this government of ours. So that gives us numbers. People who are dispossessed and who don't have power, the one thing that have, I tell my urban politics class, the one thing that we have is numbers and the possibility to disrupt business as usual. Hit them in the pockets. Why can't we boycott and strike? We can still do that. Instead of marching and shouting, let's take our money and go somewhere else with it. We live in a capitalist society. That's what really matters, is the bottom line. So let's vote with our dollars. Let's take our money. Don't shop at places that don't treat us right. Right? I mean, maybe you like being mistreated. I had to tell my own son, don't take no shorts. Because he didn't want to speak up about something. And it made me so angry. I'm like, no, you are going to speak up about this, period. We went to a restaurant to go eat one night, buffet, and when we went in, first I should have known, I pulled in the parking lot, nobody was there, like, I was hungry, I didn't care. Went inside, no one inside the restaurant. I go over and I look at the food, I fix my plate, I sit down. My son's a teenager, so of course, a boy. Right, I don't know if he could taste it, what he was even eating, his food. That's all he knew. And I said, first taste, like, oh, this food is cold. And everything on my plate was cold. I said, I'm sorry. I said, told him, stop eating. We gotta go. You just can't stop eating and just get up and leave out of the restaurant. I said, excuse me, but I'm paying for this. I want hot food. I told the lady, I'm sorry, but we have to go. The food is cold. We got into the car. My son, you're rude. I don't know why you did that. That was wrong. I was like, you don't take shorts in life. Especially if you're paying for something. Whether you pay with your dollars, or your body, or your mind, or your life. Don't take no shorts. Don't accept poor behavior. Don't accept poor service. You know, so we have to push. And that brings to my last point, is I went to a talk on Tuesday night and some said that the civil rights movement is not over, but the next generation is not attached to the movement. As Delisa said, the dots haven't been connected for them. We don't have a cause. So my closing point about not having a cause is, yes, we do. We need to identify what it is. It may not be the right to vote now, but it may be the right to a decent wage. It may be the right not to get hit over the head by a police officer on the side of the road on a routine traffic stop. Okay? So my last closing point is, and this comes from the Bible, without a vision, the people perish. Thank you.
Let's give our panelists another round of applause. Yeah, this was amazing.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, we had Mr. Dennis talk about the dignity our communities had in the 60s and earlier. And to some extent, we've lost that. We had Dr. Morrison talk about our leaders being visionary social change agents. And somehow I think we might have lost that. And we had Dr. Davis come follow up with the changing demographic discussions. And one changing demographic that was not mentioned is our bursting at the seams prison population. By being the moderator, I have the privilege of asking the first question, if you don't mind. And that one question, and I'll open it up to the audience, is there now a need for a race-specific agenda, or is there a race-specific agenda, and is there a need to rally around a race-specific agenda? That's the first question. And that's to all of you. You kind of answered part of it in your last statement, but we can start with you, Dr. Davis.
I'm not sure if, I think a race-specific agenda as far as who we choose to run for office for us may be applicable and may be useful. I'm not sure on a nationwide, you're talking about states perhaps, yes, but on a nationwide and national level, we don't have the numbers alone to push a race-specific agenda very far. I don't know how far that would get us. It may be a good start. I'm just not sure how far along that would get us. Only because of, I said, the growing conservatism in America. Actually, there's some racial backlash against President Obama, being in office. Some people just can't even stand the idea of a black man being in office, whether he's doing a good job or not. They just can't stand the idea. And so there's lots of pushback on that. And it's subtle pushback. It's not very overt in some instances. So I'm not sure if we begin to articulate and push a race-specific agenda, we're going to get major pushback again, and I just don't know how far it will get us. Not saying it's not a good idea, but I'm not sure where it will take us.
Well, are you able to hear in the back? I think that's situational. There are circumstances when a race agenda is absolutely appropriate. And one simple example is in small town politics in Mississippi, where we are the dominant force in these communities. There's every reason why we should have a race-centric agenda. If you are the majority of your community, I don't know how else you could define citizen interest without having a race-centric agenda. So there are situations when this is entirely appropriate. The other thing I would say that's important for us are the kinds of issues, welfare interests that we have that are clear. Jobs, as one example, being having the highest unemployment rate. So an interest for us is jobs. And I can imagine a circumstance where when you're bidding to make a choice about political leadership, you want to know who is it that favors that welfare interest you have. And it brings us to the question of the problem of the Obama presidency and the race agenda. Many people argue correctly, I think, that Barack Obama is president of the United States and not president of black people, and that's true. It's absolutely true. So there's a certain kind of expectation that devolves from that, but we must also remember that African Americans or black people are a part of the constituency in the United States. So we should also have the expectation that Barack Obama would respond to those issues that are particular to us as a community in reference to welfare interests. And there's been a lot of noise about the extent to which that has happened in this presidency. So, I mean, I think this depends. There's not one answer to how this works. I do think, in reference to some of the discussion of Professor Davis, that there is some variety of interests that are more characteristic of the African American community writ large, notwithstanding the fact that there are biracials and that there are interracial cultural differences in certain parts of the country. It still remains the fact that in this country, in the way policies are made and in the structure of power, that this community resides largely in a space of the outsider.
I think we need to be race specific. And I'll tell you why. Not to the extent whereby you exclude, but to the fact is that we've got to be able to bring back our culture, our history, our sense of values that we had and what we brought into this country, which was taken away from us. We've got to be able how to turn the tide that our black males don't take the pipeline to prison, but begin to feel that they are just as much of a human being as anybody else is. That they're willing to stand and make it a stand with anybody else is. We've got to take it about, look at our children, that they know their history. They know where they come from. They know the values of their mothers and their fathers and their sisters and their brothers and their grandparents and great-grandparents, not only here but across the land. We don't have any problems with talking about Chinatown. We don't have any problems talking about Little Italy. But we have a problem by talking about black people having their own space. And I'm saying it's about time that we say we are proud and we can have our own space and we still can integrate with you. You integrate with us, but we have our own space because we are who we are and we are proud of it. It does not mean that I'm a racist. I believe it in myself. But we have to begin to put into our schools and our classrooms, our churches and everything, to talk about who we are as a people. And to me, that's race specific, that I'm willing to share with anybody else. but I am who I am. And I didn't come from just a total black family. No two black people ended up producing a gray-eyed, yellow, kinky-haired person like me. So integration's been around, all right? Okay? But at the same time is I've got to look deep inside about that black side of me that is just as real as anybody else's they have. And we have to deal with this whole issue about black elected officials. It's true. We have a lot of black elected officials. And Mississippi is the largest number. But at the same time is our black people in Mississippi are still at the bottom of the pole when it comes to economics, education, and all the things that are important to being a human being and a first-class citizen. So why is that? Is the issue about being elected, or do we need to be able to begin to re-examine about what is power? Where is the power? Because right now is what controls this country is that 1%, not the 99%. So you got these PACs and everything else, millions of dollars, like you said. Absolutely correct. It takes all that money. 500. What? Exactly right. The public's out there talking all this stuff and everything else. Why they're making, who makes the decisions? Obama was elected. I'm happy to see that. But what we've all been, what that shows me though, is what has he been able to do for the people? And I think he has really tried. But they shut him down, the power did. He has not been able to get anything through Congress and anything else that's going to really benefit the people and the nation as a whole. Because everybody out there, Republicans, others, all they say now is, at all costs, get rid of Obama. It has nothing to do with issues. It's race specific. So we talk about power. You see what they do to Obama, they did it to another black person, Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
He was, economic development was all about it and everything else is, and they cut the rugs out and made him look as if he was a thief. Right. You look at the history about Marcus Garvey. And Obama is, they said, well, we just don't let you do anything, so therefore you'll be blamed for everything. That's bad. If anything good happens, they say, it's not because of him. Anything bad happens, it's because of you. So you look at the two. But when you talk about power in other pieces, being race specific, you want to sit down. Education. In Reconstruction time, overnight almost, 300 schools came into existence in this country for black kids. And what they did, the families and people in the communities did was, they would not let the carpetbaggers come in and teach. They said, we have to teach our own kids. That was power. And today people don't understand where did the teachers come from to develop those 300 schools when they weren't even allowed to read and write in public. Where did they come from? So the basement of the churches, skies in Sunday school, what happened? What they found a way to do this, and it happened. It wasn't because they were racist, but they just felt as if I don't want a person who has enslaved my children and me to come and talk about they won't be able to teach my children. So it's not about being a racist. It's about talking about myself, who I am, and being proud of who I am. And I'm going to tell you, in the work that I do with kids, as they begin to increase the knowledge here, automatically their pants come up.
Yes.
So we might be interested to say is we need to be able to deal with and concentrate on another end that has to do who we are, what we are, and be able to get people to be proud of themselves. We need to stop. That's the population in prisons. Our black males are disappearing. It's not because they want to be there. It's because we, this country, and we have turned our backs. They need to know, the young kids need to know they are somebody and who they are. So yes, I think we do need to have an agenda that's being race specific. Not racist, but more race specific.
We'll take questions from the floor. Yes.
You was you implied about the demise of the communal system once integration is beginning to become in effect. My question to you is, if the ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson if they had executed it to the letter of the law, what effect do you think that would have on black people, and what type of, you think we would be in a better situation today if it had been separate but equal as it's supposed to be, opposed to immigration a little later on?
I don't think that, that's a great question, because I don't think that it's across the board, no.
Can you repeat your question, please, sir?
I'm sorry, you just want to get the mic.
Oh, what I was saying was, he implied that, well, that was my interpretation of it. I need to step up.
In the future.
Okay, my interpretation of it was that the integration was a major factor in the demise of the communal system that black people had during the 60s and the time before that. My question was, if integration had never taken place and the ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson had been executed the way it's supposed to have been, ask them what type of situation, or would we be in a better state with if their ruling nothing had overturned their ruling and it was separate but equal?
Let me clarify one thing. No, I didn't. That's a misinterpretation. I wasn't saying that integration causes the way that we used it, or rather how the Civil Rights Act was used as a tool, all right, it gave you certain rights, or provided them access to it. But at the same time is what was connected to it. And I was very specific. I thought talking about the poverty program and how it was used, urban renewal and others, to break up the black community and the black family structure as we knew it, which is different than what the other parts of the country did. We did survival with extended family piece, because that was core to our movement aspect of it. So what I was saying is that this tool was used, it looked good to us, and it was good in a lot of sense, but it was used as a tool also to break up the core of what we had in terms of a movement. And our communities, so that they don't exist anymore as we used to have. Plessy v. Ferguson, no, I don't think that would work, but one of the things is that I was one of the few, I got in a lot of trouble because when they started talking about busing and stuff like this, and education and everything, I was against that. I didn't think they should move our kids into the white communities per se. I thought they should take the resources that existed and brought them back into our communities, and we could have survived that. But at the same time, I still want to have the rights to go and do whatever I want to do. But I also felt that I could survive in my own community. Because young people don't know, we had a strong community. It was strong. When someone got sick, people were there. If you couldn't pay your bills, your neighbors came to you. You know, children were taken care of. No one was really hungry, per se, you know. I mean, you wouldn't have had the homeless like you have now, because someone would take in. The church would have taken in. People had done something. I mean, it was a love that I talked about was destroyed, per se. So now I think you should have to have the rights. But by exercising those rights, I should not have had to desert my own and leave my own community. I was made to be ashamed of where I lived. One last piece on that, I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, my grandmother and parents, relatives, could go out in the field and come back and put some in a pot and told me to drink it and stuff like that is, and my fever went away, they rubbed stuff on me, all right, and I got well, I didn't go to no doctors, okay, and they called it herbal medicine that we were made to be ashamed of and called it voodoo and stuff like this, and now some people are making millions of dollars on herbal medicine. That's just one example. That was one example. We talk about soul food. We had to figure out how to make the best of the waste because that was given to us. But I remember my grandparents and stuff did things like they would cook those greens without any meat in them. We had no refrigerator, anything like that is. And the next morning, get up in the morning, there was no orange juices, but I had better drink that nasty cup of what they call pot liquor, because my grandmother said, there's iron in that boy, you better drink it. I'm still alive.
Next question. Come to the mic, please.
Thank you. First and foremost, giving honor to Almighty God and the ancestors who paved the way for us. Thank you, Dr. Chapman, lovely bookstore, exceptional with the work. Dr. McLemore, thank you for the book list. I hope that many people will begin to read it. And thanks for all the sacrifice of those who are on the dais and those who helped you, whose names will never be mentioned. A, how can a leadership who refuses to read Miseducation of the Negro and Destruction of Black Civilization ever lead the people anywhere but in circles? That's the first question. How can leadership who refuses to read Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson, and Destruction of Black Civilization, Chancellor Williams, ever lead the people anywhere but in circles? Number two, sister, the answer to your question is embedded in Amos N. Wilson. Amos N. Wilson. Number three, Dr. John Henry Clark, Great and Mighty Walker. Dr. John Henry Clark, Great and Mighty Walker. Number four, Hidden Colors. Just came out recently. If you get a chance, you can watch all of these on DVD. And my final question is, whatever happened with the Buy Black program, Buy Black for your own black self? It sounded like he was listening to Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey, whose names are still cuss words in most pulpits today. The first set of questions obviously addressed to Dr. McLemore related to the book list. The next is related to the gentleman in the suit with the bald head who talked about the Buy Black.
Dr. Morrison.
Dr. Morrison.
David, thank you for those questions. I'm not really on the panel, but I would strongly recommend that the book list that David just mentioned, clearly there are a number of books that we all should read. W.B. Du Bois wrote a terrific book called Black Reconstruction. And Black Reconstruction has been mentioned a couple of times this evening. That was the first book that I read on Reconstruction by Du Bois. And anyone who has a real keen interest in the Reconstruction era, Black Reconstruction by Du Bois is just a great place to start. Franklin's book on From Slavery to Freedom is a general text that everybody should at least read and be aware of and have in your library. David, I think in part the the answer to part of your concern and question that you raised, Dr. Davis, Professor Davis spoke to that. From the standpoint of, we really have to develop a mentoring system. I mean, we really have to train our young women and men to run for public office, to be an active participant in the political system. I mean, we can't get out of this struggle without people doing a variety of things. And in some quarters, a black elected official is a bad word. But on the other hand, if we are going to be active participants in the American political system, we have to run for office. And I think the point that David really is trying to make is that you have to have a solid foundation and know your history and the history of struggle in order to clearly appreciate where we are and where we ought to be going. And so often what happens is that people get elected to office and have no sense of history or community, but also have really no very good grasp of why they were elected and what they can do with the positions that they have. But clearly having some sense of that history is important. And whether we like it or not, we have to mentor our elected officials. And I mean, I don't want to be personal here, but our young district attorney, who is a good example of what one can do, and he comes from a long line of people that have made a difference in this community, in this state. So he grew up with positive role models. And before we get out of here, Mr. District Attorney, you got to come up here and say something about your parents and your grandfather and other people, because you didn't get that opportunity. But I think he is a prime example of what one can do with one's life if one wishes to do that. And the other point that Dr. Davis made clearly was that we really need more women. We need more women in our community running for public office and serving in public life. That is so important. So I hope all young ladies and girls think about public service. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to run for office to do anything. I'm not saying that at all, because there aren't but so many offices. But I think it is important for us to see public service as an important career path for young people in this state and across the nation. So, but let us read about our history. Let us be aware of the contributions of the people whose shoulders that we stand on, you know, tonight and every day.
Well, I don't really know what I can add. I do think Professor Davis addressed this when she was talking about the problem with the pipeline. We live in a world today where there's so much clutter that people don't just read anymore. And I see Mr. Simpson back there, who remembers a time at Tuvalu when we just read stuff. And so I would add to that list of Chancellor Williams and Carter G. Woodson, Frantz Fanon as somebody that we ought to be reading. Let me give you one example of something I'm trying to do amidst all the noise that's going on in the place where I work. Is to organize a reading group and to invite anybody who is serious about living to come and just read with me the important sources. And I think that that really is embedded in what she's talking about developing the pipeline. Because one of the things I know, for example, that characterizes both African American men in the place where I am, first is that they're absent. They're just not there. And African American women is that they're not reading, and I don't think it's because they're not serious. I think people are serious. It is just that there is nobody to mentor, nobody who is saying to them, I am available to have this conversation with you. I am available to engage you on important pieces of literature because of what that does for your head that lifts up your pants, or, you know, whatever. The pants thing is a huge one for me. But I mean, I think that that really is the point. So I accept your point.
We have time for a couple of more questions in the back.
This is specifically for Dr. Davis, but also any of the other panel members can also answer. You mentioned how now you have more blacks who define themselves by their mixed ancestry and their mixed race. Do you think that that acknowledgement and definition of the black individual by their mixed race stems from the dark skin, light skin controversy of the past? And also, do you think that mentality can be like a bridge between that reconciles different races here in the United States?
I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday night. As far as identifying with so you're saying if you're Asian and black, you may say you're black rather than Asian? Or are you saying as biracial? Biracial. Identifying as biracial because people have some sort of reason, not wanting to be associated with black people or not wanting to be called black? Is that what you're asking?
I guess it's not, they don't want to be called just black.
Okay.
They I'm black and.
Okay. I think that people doing that and acknowledging that they're biracial and saying I am whatever I am is a multiracial or biracial. I think that that's just way that people want to identify, and we can't decide how people want to identify. I think it's an acknowledgement of the reality that I don't have to choose. I don't have to pick one box. If I don't feel on one box, I can pick 2 or 3. I do think that identifying as black in some sense is a political choice. I think that most black people here could probably say, raise your hand if you could check more than one box. That you know you could check more than one box and you're African American, right? So I know that my ancestry is Native American and white and African American. I sat and talked with my grandparents several years ago and I asked about my family background just to find out, why I look like this. Being yellow, like you said. And so I really asked my grandmother a lot of questions about that, and I found out that I had a Native American great-grandmother and a great-grandfather who my grandmother said when she met him, she thought he was a white man, and she was afraid to go and sit on his lap and talk with him. So I just think that, for black people, maybe in my generation, even though I could check more than one box, I choose not to because I identify myself as African American or as a black woman. But those who would like to identify in other ways, that's their choice. We're in America, people are free to choose as they would like to. And as far as that being a bridge between the races, possibly. We're talking about the browning of America. Some people may remember years and years ago, maybe about 20 years ago, this is showing my geekiness. When I was younger, I used to read Time and Newsweek. there was a cover, and I don't know which magazine it was, but it had this generic looking woman's face on there, and she was brown, probably her shade of brown more than mine. And it said, this person was the future American, and they were talking about in 2050, when we change over the demographics, and whites are in the minority, and we have more minorities of color in America, that all of us eventually are gonna be some shade of brown, right? And is that going, and so your question is, will that help bridge the gap, right, between the races? Quite possibly, I don't know. I think generally it may help bridge the gap. And one thing I want to say about those children who are minority children, they are majority biracial children and multiracial children, and not just black and white, but Puerto Rican and Asian, or Latino and something else, right? So it's not just the black-white binary that these people are. So when that generation comes along, maybe by then they'll just call themselves Americans. I don't know, right? But there's a couple of issues with that, which also gets to the question. There's this book called Racism Without Races by Edwin Bonilla Silva, and he talks about the myth of colorblindness. So if we're going to a colorblind society, the question is, what does that mean? And he says that the idea of colorblindness is dangerous. And it's not dangerous because, it's going to bring us all together. But he says that it's dangerous because if we say we're all Americans and we're not black or Mexican or Italian or something else, what that happens is that removes any discursive space for people to talk about race and racism. So if you experience racism, there's no way for you to talk about it because there won't be any legitimate language to talk about what you experience because you're not black, you're American. And he talks about this is what's going on in Brazil, when Brazil has a very color-coded hierarchy of racialization of the colors that start with still, like the very lightest Brazilians on the top and the very darkest, the Afro-Brazilians on the bottom, economically and socially and culturally. And Brazil says, they don't say that I'm Afro-Brazilian or I'm mulatto or I'm morena. They say, we're all Brazilians. What are you talking about, racism? There's no racism. We're all Brazilians. So this is a danger with going towards a colorblind, the idea and the myth of colorblindness. So that's the part of the problem with the idea of racial mixing is gonna move us away from being racist or living in a racial society or society that's racially ordered based on the color of your skin.
Listen, I this racial categorization business, it's important to understand that this is in part a state project. And this isn't the first time we've been here in the United States. There is a long history of the state organizing and determining these categories and using them in the census. Right. It's not entirely clear to me that we are any more biracial, deracial, whatever you want to call it, than we've always been. You know, I think all those color variations and the options for talking about oneself have always been there, but the state has always had a project of defining these categories, and Brazil is an interesting case as well, where it is equally a state project. These 160 ways by which one can identify oneself by color variation in Brazil, and black is the residual category there, are all state imposed. So, you know, I'm not entirely sure that there's anything new here, necessarily, since these have always been available and the state has always been involved in how we call these things.
one drop rule. I don't know why it don't work the other way though.
Unfortunately, we have to close it out. We have closing remarks by Dr. McLemore, but we also want to recognize the District Attorney Smith. You can come up with your family and introduce yourselves. Oh, yes. Yes.
Good evening. I won't be very long. I'll be very short, in fact. But when I saw something published or announced about my grandfather, I was very, very happy to see that there was this panel coming together. I learned a lot tonight. In fact, wow. I hope I can get this on CD or purchase this because this was very, very thought-provoking. The thing that I have learned from my grandfather, from my family, and from really the entire community is the power of giving, the power of helping, and the power of uplifting other people. Because often when we see others in offices and in other places, it seems to be about that person and what they can gain. So I'm happy to say that most people who have gotten to know me, I'm not that way. I've learned to help and give, and some people are not that way, but I want to say that I want to keep it that way, and I want to let the community know I'll stay that way. And I appreciate you all acknowledging my grandfather, and I hope you all think I'm doing a good job. And if there's anything else I can do, and I will certainly, I will certainly do it. Now, these, I told you who my parents were earlier. These are my parents.
I wish you would mention that name again, please.
Okay.
Because everybody didn't hear that.
Okay, yes, Miss Alice Smith and Dr. Boyd Smith. We've got some friends with us today. And okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Are there any announcements? I have one or two. You have one, please.
I just wanted to invite everybody out on March 20th. March is Women's History Month, and so in honor of Women's History Month, the Department of Political Science is going to host a showing of Chisholm 72, Bought and Unbossed, which is a documentary about Shirley Chisholm's run for the president's office. She is an unsung hero. You don't often hear about her. Quite a few of my students didn't even know. I gave them a little pop quiz to see if they knew who was the first black person to run for president and who was the first woman. It's the same person as Shirley Chisholm. So please, if you have time, it's at 10:30 to 11:20 on March 20th in the J. Shue Student Center in the Little Theater. And if you can't come, please tell somebody else to come. Please invite someone if you do come. Thank you.
I just want to say something about that. Is about not only she was the first black to run for president, but she actually carried a state, a southern state. Shirley Chisholm carried the state of Louisiana in that election, which is still on the books. I'm going to say that about her.
Just a couple of quick announcements. I hope all of you, when you came in, received this literature pamphlets, brochures we were passing out that Keith McMillan here, who was the moving spirit behind organizing this program, putting it on, and Jaleesa, where are you? Okay. And Michael, where are you? Oh, Michael, okay, that Michael, okay. Jaleesa and Michael are graduate assistants in the HAME Institute, and Keith McMillan is the program coordinator, liaison. He changes his title every week, but he does a lot. So thank you, Keith. Thank you, Jaleesa. Thank you, Michael. On the Thursday, the 22nd of March, a discussion of Lynch Street, the book, by Tim Spofford, who published it several years ago. That's going to be in room 100 of the Charles F. Moore building on campus. And I hope and trust that all of you will come. Take this flyer with you, please. And the veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement will hold our 7th annual conference. Hope you will get copies of this nice brochure too, March 21st through 25th on the campus of Jackson State University, and a number of details here. Will all of the veterans of Mississippi Civil Rights would stand? We have any in here? We have any in here? Thank you, veterans. And on April 20th, the annual Humanitarian Awards Program on the campus of Jackson State University. And we are recognizing John Garner, Susan Gleason, Reverend Hickman Johnson, and Flunzy Brown Wright on the campus, noontime, 11:30 on April 20th. Let me just thank again the panelists, let me thank the families, and Keith, we need to make sure that we get pictures of the families immediately before they leave, immediately following. We want to thank the Henry, Lindsey family, and the Smith family for gracing us with their presence and for contributing the outstanding men that K.C. Morrison talked about, who clearly made a difference in this state and in this country. And I think we all recognize, as Dr. Morrison pointed out, that in 1962, to run for the U.S. Congress in Mississippi was a defiant act. And those men knew that they couldn't win, but they served as a role model for all of the things that happened. Because if you think we're talking about 50 years ago, 1962, their campaigns, James Meredith integrated the University of Mississippi in 1962, 50 years ago. And then in 1963, the Freedom Boat campaign, where Aaron Henry and Ed King ran for governor and lieutenant governor on that Freedom Boat ticket. 1963. So we got a lot of anniversaries coming up. The assassination of Medgar 50 years ago come next year. This rich history that we need to teach our young people about, and we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds. But let's give our panel members and our moderator another round of applause, and thank all of you for coming.